This forecast was prepared by the Planet X Town Hall Comet Elenin Research Team. The goal of this program is to alert viewers to the possibility of catastrophic events that may occur during the passage of Comet C 2010 X1 Elenin through the core of our system during the fall of 2011. Hello, I'm Marshall Masters, host of Your Own World Radio and the publisher of Your Own World USA. In the last few months, there's been a lot of interest in Comet Elenin, and according to Google, there are nearly 1.5 million pages on the topic. Many of them are filled with fear and concern. So, is this fear justified? The forecast presented in this program is the result of hundreds of man-hours invested by the Planet X Town Hall Comet Elenin Research Team. It is being made because the hard data now paints a real possibility that Comet Elenin could be the dreaded Blue Star Kachina of Hopi prophecy. In this program, we're going to present a summary of our findings. Our hope is that you will use this information to evaluate your own preparation and planning to see if there's something you need to be doing. When it comes to survival, the most important thing you must remember is that the only truth that matters is the truth that resonates within you, and the only way that happens is when you and you alone put it there. How do you know when you've accomplished that? Well, within yourself you will find the strength to stand alone in your knowing, if need be. In Part 1 of this program, we'll introduce the Hopi Blue Star prophecy from a secular, science-based perspective. In Part 2, we'll use other famous comets from the past to help explain the possible dangers we now face in our near future. In Part 3, we'll present our forecast for Comet Elenin for the period from September 1, 2011 to January 16, 2012. In Part 4, you'll learn about some simple and affordable things you can begin doing today. Our philosophy is that while we cannot do all the big things we want, we can do the little things that matter, and enough of them can make a big difference in your own personal survival. However, before we begin Part 1, we need to briefly look at the disinformation being injected into this and similar topics by well-funded and highly organized groups of disinformation operatives. The goal of this disinformation is simple. Those most likely to die in a cataclysm are the ones who do not see it coming. Later on in this program, you will learn exactly why the elites are so intent on population reduction through a global cataclysm. In the meantime, suffice it to say that this topic is so muddied that it becomes nearly impossible for many to draw a clear conclusion, especially one that leads to taking action. However, while the public has always been generally aware of this manipulation, there has been an awakening event. This happened when a group of talented computer hackers who simply call themselves Anonymous took on the elites of the world in defense of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Since 1999, when I first began writing on space threats and Earth changes, there's always been one constant: disinformation. And the disinformation that I see being injected into the topic of Comet Elenin is very well organized and apparently well funded. So, what is it the disinformationalists are saying? The first thing our research team saw after the discovery of this comet by Russian astronomer Leonid Elenin on December 10, 2012, was a sudden burst of disinformation theories, which in turn spawned subsequent levels of innocent misinformation by members of the public. These disinformation theories include: Elenin is Planet X. Elenin is a brown dwarf star. Elenin is a black hole. Elenin is an alien mothership. We immediately suspected these disinformation ploys, but as independent researchers, we knew that we had to run them to ground, and what we found was that in every instance, we could not vet these disinformation theories to a reliable or honest source. Therefore, our findings are that none of these are true. A good example is the hard data used to debunk the disinformation ploys that Comet Elenin is Planet X or a brown dwarf star. Intrigued by the claims that Comet Elenin could be a brown dwarf star or a large planet, amateur astronomers showed some really good initiative. What they did was they used cataloged asteroids and tracked them before and after flybys past Elenin. What they found was Elenin did not have the mass necessary to disturb the orbits of these known asteroids. So in other words, Comet Elenin is just that, a comet. That being said, there was one interesting bit of what could now be viewed as misinformation from none other than NASA. In May of this year, Don Yeomans of NASA's Near-Earth Object Program at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena said, "This is what happens when these long-period comets come in from way outside our planetary system. They make these long, majestic, speedy arcs through our solar system, and sometimes they put on a great show. But not Elenin. Right now, that comet looks kind of wimpy." In fairness to NASA, we initially saw Comet Elenin as wimpy as well, but that's not the way it stayed. You know, there's one absolute in the universe, and that is change. Things can and do change, and that's what this comet has been doing. So using the most current available data, we have formulated our program to present what we feel to be the three most possible outcomes. If you want to light a prayer candle over this, option A is the right choice. That this turns out to be an interesting but uneventful flyby. Let's all hope that does become the case. With option B, the flyby of Elenin will be remembered as a fearful event, for much the same reason as the 1910 flyby of Halley's Comet, in which case there may or may not be a marked increase in earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Of the three options, C is the worst-case scenario, that Elenin is indeed the blue star Kachina of Hopi prophecy, which precedes the larger and far more destructive Red Star Kachina of the same prophecy. In this program, we'll focus on the worst-case scenario, that Comet Elenin is the blue star Kachina. Now, to do that, we're first going to take a secular look at the Hopi as a people, and then we're going to look at the prophecy from a somewhat scientific view to identify the attributes that are important. But the first big question is, are the Hopi a reliable source of prophecy? I myself grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, at a time when Phoenix was much smaller and the Hopi were far more visible. But even today, they are still well regarded. The Hopi are natives of northwestern Arizona. They are an ancient indigenous people, and their history dates back to 500 AD. A peaceful agricultural people, they feel a close bond with the earth. Their ancient prophecy warned them well in advance of the coming of the white men. Very spiritual in nature, they chose the path of nonviolence because it is what their prophecy instructed them to do. For thousands of years, they have waited in anticipation of these times and the arrival of the blue star and red star Kachinas, at which time global cataclysms will reorder the nature of life on our planet. The Hopi are a spiritual and peaceful people, and they see us entering a time of great danger. To their credit, they have made several attempts to warn world leaders. The Hopi have repeatedly warned our leaders that World War III will be started in either India, China, the Islamic nations, or Africa. As a result, the United States will be destroyed by atomic bombs and radioactivity. A similar prophecy was also given to us by the ancient Egyptians in the years following the Hebrew Exodus in the newly revealed wisdom text, the Qumran Bible. In it, the Egyptian soothsayers warn us that one warship will pass into the 4 quarters of the earth, talking peace and bringing war. The operative phrase here is talking peace. This is important when you consider the driving message of the 3 great desert god beliefs, where Judaism is a celebration of life, Christianity is a religion of love, and Islam is the religion of peace. As the author of Crossing the Cusp, Surviving the Edgar Cayce Pole Shift, I'm fascinated with Hopi prophecy and its predictions of a coming pole shift in our times. For these reasons, the Hopi Blue Star Kachina prophecy is likewise a dire warning for our times, and one that can only be ignored through hubris and arrogance. With this in mind, let's now review this urgent prophecy for our times in terms of its most scientifically relevant points. The prophecy warns us that we will see 2 Kachinas, or gods if you will. The first is the Blue Star Kachina. It will be the harbinger of the far more deadly Red Star Kachina that follows behind it. This form of prophecy is consistent with that of other predictions throughout history, in where we are first given the harbinger to know that we are in harm's way, and then the catastrophic event itself that occurs if we choose to ignore the prophecy. What really piqued our interest as researchers is that the Hopi prophecy gives us 2 very clear physical attributes for the Blue Star Kachina, whether that turns out to be Comet Elenin or not. The prophecy tells us that the Blue Star Kachina will appear with what the Hopi call nephews. Interestingly enough, NASA JPL imagery clearly shows smaller objects that are not orbiting Elenin, but rather moving in parallel with it. The Hopi nephews, if you will. The second physical attribute focuses our attention on the Blue Kachina itself. According to the prophecy, those who are at peace in their hearts already are in the great shelter of life. There is no shelter for evil. When the Sakwaha, Blue Star Kachina, dances in the plaza and removes his mask, the time of the great trial will be here. The operative phrase here is that the Blue Star Kachina removes his mask, or in other words, it is a very sudden unmasking. In part 2 of this program, we're going to look at other notable comets from the past to see if this is really possible with Comet Elenin. As researchers, we were taken aback by the amount of disinformation we initially saw in the topic. However, disinformation does have its uses. It tells you about the false positives. And this allows you to focus on the core issues, and that is where you begin to connect the dots. And when we did, an unsettling pattern formed. In this program, we're going to compare the presently available hard data about Comet Elenin with 3 other notable comet flyby events from the past. The first of which was the fear and panic created by the 1910 flyby of Halley's Comet. Then we'll look at how Comet Linear completely broke apart in 2000. And finally, how Comet Holmes surprised astronomers in 2007 with a completely unexpected and sudden brightening. During the 1910 flyby of Halley's Comet, there was a lot of concern in the United States that the comet would poison all life on the planet. So where did this concern come from? In the latter half of the 19th century, scientists developed the ability to analyze the composition of comets, and when Halley's Comet appeared in 1910, they discovered that it was outgassing hydrogen cyanide. In other words, the hydrogen cyanide within the comet was dissolving and being released into the coma and tail. The last man to be executed with hydrogen cyanide notable for its almond smell, was Walter Legrand in Arizona on March 3, 1999. Now let's fast forward to July 30th of this year and a discovery about Comet Elenin that was, frankly, rather disturbing. This is when the Joint Astronomy Center reported the discovery of hydrogen cyanide in the composition of Comet Elenin. Here's where the fears that attended the flyby of Halley's Comet in 1910 and the flyby of Comet Elenin this year connect. Both comets are comprised of, and likewise outgas, hydrogen cyanide. Like Halley's Comet, Comet Elenin also presents the danger of Earth flying through the comet's tail and the possibility of hydrogen cyanide poisoning. In fact, this was such a concern in 1910 that many people bought gas masks and anti-cyanide comet pills from snake oil salesmen. Others organized comet parties with the intention of meeting the end in a more enjoyable setting. Given that Earth could fly through Comet Elenin's tail, will Americans buy gas masks and organize comet parties like they did in 1910? Perhaps, but we're more concerned about Comet Elenin's hydrogen cyanide outgassing for another reason. Although most scientists still think of comets as dirty snowballs, many now view these objects as being more complex than that. Aside from being a deadly poisonous gas that can enhance the blueness of a comet, hydrogen cyanide also has one other critical attribute. It is a natural dielectric. In an electric universe, hydrogen cyanide behaves like an electrical insulator, and it can turn a comet into a large cosmic capacitor capable of storing a massive charge, one that can be released in the blink of an eye and for any number of reasons. One way to imagine a comet as a capacitor can be found in a common office copier. The next time the repairman comes to service the copier in your office, ask him why the copier needs to have its own dedicated connection to the wall outlet, as opposed to being plugged into a surge protector. He'll likely tell you when you turn on the copier, the first thing it does is to draw in a massive amount of electricity from the wall outlet, more than a common surge protector will allow. The reason for this is that copiers use large capacitors to store the energy needed to properly make copies, so that when you press the copy button, the machine lights up and makes a perfect copy every time. Given that Comet Elenin is partly comprised of hydrogen cyanide, a gas with dielectric properties, and that it has taken some 10,000 years to return to the core of our solar system, what we essentially have is a comet with the capability to behave like a powerful cosmic capacitor. Interestingly enough, there is a historical precedent in Comet S4 Linear. In 2000, it mysteriously disintegrated just as it was about to transit the ecliptic. Assuming that Comet Elenin is A, behaving like a large capacitor because it is partly comprised of hydrogen cyanide, B, that it has taken over 10,000 years to arrive here in the core of our system, and C, that during this time it may have collected a great electrical charge, could then we see that Elenin's transit from the southern skies of our solar system through the ecliptic and into the northern skies of our solar system be the cosmic trigger, so to speak, that punches its button? One answer to that question can easily be found in the mysterious disintegration of Comet S4 Linear in 2000. Just a few days before it was to transit the ecliptic, S4 Linear suddenly and unexpectedly disintegrated. It was as though it had hit an electrically charged brick wall and shattered apart. At the time, scientists debated whether S4 Linear was simply an old dirty snowball whose time had come, whereas others maintain that it had hit something. If it did hit something, what exactly did it hit? An asteroid or some remaining fragment of another comet? Or, as many now maintain, that this is what happens when you live in an electric universe? If so, that now gives us pause for concern. This is because we may yet see a historical connection between Comet S4 Linear and Comet Elenin. If so, on or about September 11th of this year, Comet Elenin will reach its point of perihelion, its closest distance to the Sun, at about the same time it likewise transits the ecliptic. If this perihelion and ecliptic transit proves to be a double whammy, could it be enough to punch Comet Elenin's button, so to speak? And what would that look like? For that, we look backward in time to 2007 and the sudden and unexpected brightening of Comet Holmes in October of that year, at which time its coma, the gaseous dust ball surrounding it, expanded to a size larger than the diameter of our own Sun, briefly making it the largest object in the solar system. This brings us to Comet Elenin, which early in August of this year brightened more than expected. Likewise, it also expanded to a size greater than that of the diameter of planet Jupiter, and it continues to grow. And now here's the kicker: distance. Comet Holmes passed through the system beyond the orbit of Mars. However, Comet Elenin will pass between us and the average distance to the planet Venus, much closer. So with this in mind, before we move on to part 3 of our program, let's briefly review what we've covered so far. Comet Elenin is accompanied by other objects moving in parallel with it, or nephews, as the Hopi prophecy calls them. Like Halley's Comet, Comet Elenin is partly comprised of hydrogen cyanide, which is a deadly gas for life on this planet. Likewise, hydrogen cyanide also serves as a natural dielectric, which greatly enhances Comet Elenin's ability to collect and store a huge negative charge. Then, like Comet Holmes, Comet Elenin unexpectedly brightened in early August of this year, as its coma expanded to a diameter greater than that of the planet Jupiter. With this in mind, we wait for September 11, when this highly charged comet reaches its point of perihelion, its closest distance to the Sun, while at the same time it also transits the ecliptic. All this raises the question: could Comet Elenin disintegrate or outburst like Comet S4 Linear did in 2000, just prior to its transit of the ecliptic? And could this odd confluence of powerful cosmic forces push Comet Elenin's button, so to speak? If so, we could suddenly see its coma grow to the diameter of the Sun. And what does that mean for us? Consider this. On or about September 26th of this year, Comet Elenin will not only be between us and the Sun, it will also be closer to us than the planet Venus, with a coma larger than the diameter of our own Sun. With this, we're now ready to move on to our forecast in part 3 of this program. And no doubt there are some heavy questions weighing on your mind, namely being, what does this mean to me and when? As the old idiom goes, you hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And that is what we had in mind when we prepared this worst-case scenario for our Comet Elenin forecast. This forecast is for the period of September 1, 2011 to January 16, 2012. And our intention here is not to frighten you. This is because, as I always say, fear is the knife's edge of death. Follow your fears, and you'll inevitably stumble upon a blade. Rather, our goal is to encourage you to channel your concerns into the more constructive pursuits of preparation and planning for whatever may come. And with that, we begin our forecast on September 1, 2011. This is when we enter what we call the danger zone. To help you evaluate these risks, we've created a threat scale. 0 is no likelihood of an event, whereas 10 is the highest possible likelihood of an event. This forecast begins on September 1, when we first enter the danger zone. The threat level for this day is 0. On September 2nd, Elenin arrives in the vicinity near the Sun, where an electromagnetic event between the two bodies first becomes a faint possibility. On September 11th, 2011, Elenin reaches its point of perihelion. Here it is at its closest distance to the Sun, which is approximately 45 million miles. At this time, it also transits the ecliptic, the plane of our solar system. As all the other major planets in our solar system orbit the Sun on or within a few degrees of the ecliptic, this is when Elenin is virtually on a level plane with the other planets. At this time, there is the strongest possibility of an electromagnetic event involving the Sun. The maximum threat date for this forecast is September 26, 2011, during a direct inferior conjunction. In this alignment, Elenin is found directly between the Sun and Earth. The principal concern with this inferior conjunction alignment is the possibility of a catastrophic electromagnetic event involving all three objects, the Sun, Comet Elenin, and the Earth. Such an event could produce cosmic lightning bolts, and this alignment will put Earth squarely in the crosshairs of this threat. At this time, we could see a violent solar interaction heading directly towards the Earth, along with increased seismic and volcanic activity, as Elenin briefly becomes as bright as a second sun in the sky. By October 1, 2011, the threat begins to ease off as Elenin moves away from its inferior conjunction alignment with the Sun and the Earth. Thus, we can expect a slightly reduced chance of an electromagnetic event. However, the threat of residual seismic and volcanic activity does remain. We see a significant but temporary drop of the threat level on October 17, 2011. This is when Elenin crosses Earth's orbit. At this point, it will reach its estimated closest distance to the Earth at some 21.5 million miles. To help put this in perspective, the average distance between Venus and the planet Earth is approximately 26 million miles. Given this distance to the Earth, there is the reduced possibility of an electromagnetic event along with residual and seismic activity on Earth. However, we do see the threat level increasing once again through the later half of October and into November. The period between November 3 to November 7, 2011 puts us into the second highest threat level for several days as Earth passes through Elenin's tail. During this time, we may see large meteor showers and some deadly impact events. We should also expect higher levels of seismic and volcanic activity. On or about November 8, 2011, Earth will exit Comet Elenin's tail. Although completing this transit will dramatically reduce the threat level, concerns over residual seismic and volcanic activity will persist. We once again see an increase in the threat level from November 20th to November 25th, 2011. This is when Elenin will be aligned in opposition to the Earth. At this time, Earth will be directly in between the Sun and Elenin. This opposition alignment could possibly trigger a solar storm aimed directly at the Earth. At this time, This alignment also increases the possibility of catastrophic seismic and volcanic events. By November 26, 2011, we begin to see a significant reduction in the threat level. At this time, we are vulnerable to the last and least significant possibility that Elenin could trigger a catastrophic solar storm aimed at the Earth. However, residual seismic and volcanic activity will continue to be a concern. From the period December 15, 2011 to January 15, 2012, we see the most significant threat reduction as Comet Elenin speeds away from the Sun towards the furthest reaches of our solar system. During this period, the risk of residual seismic and volcanic activity will begin to subside. On or about January 16, 2012, we finally exit the danger zone of this Comet Elenin flyby, with a final threat level of 0. At that time, the only thing left will be to wonder about what comes next. Earlier in this program, we talked about how the Hopi prophecy describes not one but two Kachinas. The first is the blue Kachina, essentially the harbinger. And then it is followed by the red Kachina, which is really going to be the worst of it. So assuming that Comet Elenin is the blue star Kachina, what could possibly be the red star Kachina? Planet X. By some estimates, there are as many as 50 different names for Planet X, and this object is prominently mentioned in the folklore and wisdom texts of many cultures worldwide. For example, it is referred to as the destroyer by the ancient Egyptians in the Kolbrin Bible and by the ancient Hebrews in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and again in the New Testament as wormwood. In fact, the observatory most likely to publish the official discovery of Planet X will be Project Wormwood at the Learmonth Solar Observatory in the northwestern tip of Australia. However, no matter what we eventually call it or how it eventually appears, make no mistake, it's going to hurt. So the questions now become, if Comet Elenin proves to be the blue star Kachina harbinger of Hopi prophecy, how do we survive it? If you cannot afford to build a $500,000 underground bunker to see yourself through the coming tribulation, do not be discouraged. Our strategy has always been to help folks on Main Street, because what we believe is not the big things, it's the little things taken together that make the big difference. And you'll see how that works in the next part of this program. At the beginning of our program, I told you I would explain why there's so much disinformation being injected into the topic of Comet Elenin. And to do that, we need only go back to 2005 to see what happened in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Remembered as one of the deadliest hurricanes in U.S. history, Katrina wrecked a large portion of the oil infrastructure along the Gulf Coast. As a result, the price of food and fuel temporarily spiked in America, not because there was a shortage of oil, but rather there was a temporary shortage of oil infrastructure as a consequence of the Katrina storm damage. So how does this play today? At present, we have over 6.75 billion souls on the planet, and this is because since World War II, agriculture has become increasingly dependent on petrochemical fertilizers and insecticides. Should a sudden spate of global disasters like Katrina happen and wreck the world's oil infrastructure, it will leave us with shattered oil fields, refineries, distribution networks, and so forth. So what does that mean? It means that we could return to a 19th century way of life, and farming under these circumstances will be done largely without the benefit of petrochemical-based agribusiness fertilizers and pesticides. In that case, the Earth can only support between 1 to 2 billion souls. that means over 4 billion of us could die from hunger. If so, this will not come slowly over time so that we can debate it and try and finagle our way around it. Rather, it will just hit us as hard and as fast as the Great Recession of 2008. And within weeks, not years, we will see millions of Americans dying from hunger. This is why the elites are injecting so much disinformation into this topic. It's an intentional effort to confuse and muddy the waters, because simply stated, the first to die are typically going to be the last to know. So the question for you is very simple. Where are you with your preparation and planning? Because the clock is ticking down and the window of opportunity is closing. To help you take action today, we've prepared a special Comet Elenin link page and put it on both our Your Own World Radio and Your Own World USA websites. There you will find links to freely available articles, podcasts, radio shows, and videos offering a wide range of helpful survival tips. Remember, the little things you can do today can make a big difference tomorrow. I suggest you begin with 2 excellent Your Own World Radio interviews, and you can listen to them for free from the archives. They are with Dan and Sheila Dean. Dan is the president of Greenland Energy in Dallas, Texas. And if you're wondering what the wealthy have been doing with their Bush tax cuts, you'll want to hear what Dan is saying in the first interview, because he's the guy who builds off-grid power systems for deep underground survival condos. And right now he's working 7 days a week from can to Kent just to keep up. However, his greatest concern is for those of us on Main Street, and so he offers simple and economical tips for you so that you can protect and power your essential cell phones, laptop computers, and so forth during the coming solar storms. In the second interview, Dan's wife Sheila, who is an expert on long-term survival stockpiling, offers you a quick start plan for caching inexpensive and nutritious survival foods for you and your loved ones. Another thing is that you consider my book, Planet X Forecast and 2012 Survival Guide. We wrote this book to help the little guy survive, and what Planet X Forecast and 2012 Survival Guide offers is just that, a plan for surviving a global catastrophe, no matter what comes. So if you've seen enough to know that the time has come to prepare, now is the time to get the edge you need and deserve. Whether you accept or reject Hopi prophecy, or believe that Comet Elenin is just a wimpy comet, makes no difference. All you have to do is turn on the television, and then what do we see on the news these days? Across the globe, we see debt-ridden nations in financial chaos, the rising specter of global war, and at the same time, our planet is descending into an increasing pattern of alarming Earth changes. So if you're saying something clever like, "I'll cross that bridge when I get to it," know this: you'll probably find yourself standing in a long queue behind a bridge that is long gone. And I'll leave it on that note. So until the next time we meet, remember Marshall's motto: destiny comes to those who listen and fate finds the rest. So learn what you can learn, do what you can do, and never give up hope. This is Marshall, and I'll catch you on the backside.